And it's 5 o'clock. So can I welcome everybody on behalf of the Institute of Health and Social Care Management to this, our June Health Chat event. I'm delighted that we've got Roy with us this evening, who's been struggling with the dreaded COVID, but he's recovered enough to be here tonight. It's fantastic to have him here. And we're thrilled to be able to welcome as our guest this evening, Keith Conradi. Keith is the founding member of the Healthcare Safety Investigation Branch. As many of you will know, he's stepping down, he's retiring from that role. And I guess this is your valedictory address, Keith, but I'm going to shut up now and leave it to Roy to carry out the interview. If you've got questions and so on you'd like to ask, we will have some Q&A at the end. Either pop them in the chat, or when the time comes, put your virtual hand up and we'll come to you and allow you to ask it. But Roy, over to you. Thank you.
John, thank you, and good evening, everyone. And I think I'm right in saying happy birthday to Phil Hawthorne, who's busy putting his blinds down.
Yes.
Okay, happy birthday, Phil. Thank you for joining us.
I've got my bus pass now, Roy.
Listen, I remember when I was a young man of your age. and shut up. And welcome, especially, of course, tonight to our guest, Keith Conradi. Keith, good evening. And I'm going to tentatively ask the question, how are you? Because having just gone through about 10 days of bloody COVID, I can't seem to shake off. Did you manage to shake it all off, or did you get it? Or
I never got it.
Really?
At least I never tested for it. Obviously, John's box of testing equipment that is always positive didn't get to me. But no, I've been really, really fortunate. And yeah, so I'm very well, thank you.
Because you're super fit as well. You do triathlons and things, don't you?
Yeah, I do have a predilection in that area, but I don't know whether that's connected with me not getting COVID or not. But no, I think I've probably just been lucky.
Well, maybe. I mean, I don't know. I think, well, John's pretty fit as well, and he got it. I don't think it's fitness, but I do think being fit helps your recovery. Well, look, this is interesting, Keith, because I think I was the first person to interview you when you took up your post as the chief executive. You gave us that privilege, and I'm grateful to you. Thank you. And that was a really interesting evening. And I actually looked over the tape of it this afternoon and saw us both really being very optimistic about what you might be able to achieve. And of course, tonight, I think I'm right in saying, is the last interview you're going to give. So it's kind of topped and tailed your time with us in the NHS. There will be a lot of people, of course, here in the audience tonight who won't be across the whole history of the organization, and perhaps it might be worth starting by reminding us all, really. You started, of course, in the aviation industry, which I think, I mean, it has a good record, I think, pretty good record on aviation history until you watch, what is it, Discovery on Sky Television, where air crash investigations, they seem to happen every day. But that was that. I think that was where you started, wasn't it?
Yeah, so I was a pilot for about 40 years. But the latter section of that, I moved into the Air Accidents Investigation Branch and led that branch for 6 years. And whilst I was there, I was asked to give evidence to a select committee inquiry into why the health sector, the NHS in particular, keep making the same mistakes and why aviation doesn't. So I sat in front of, it was Bernard Jenkin in the committee at the time, and I think picked up from that and the inquiry that was going on. Out of that came the birth of the Healthcare Safety Investigation Branch, and I managed to jump across from one to the other. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it was Jeremy Hunt, wasn't it, who set it up?
I think Jeremy was behind the HSIB, absolutely, and he was a big supporter. And actually, for the first couple of years while he was in post, he continued to give us all our support, and actually that was really important to us from the start of things. Yeah.
What did he? I mean, when he spoke to you, what did he want to achieve really with the HSIB?
I mean, I think he is genuinely moved by a lot of the patient tragedies that have happened, and I really think he felt that there was learning to be had from every incident that occurred, and that just wasn't happening with the approach that was taken to safety at the time. He was very much taken by the way the air industry, their attitude to safety, and their continuing sort of demand almost to get as much as possible out of every little accident. Just like you say, it's on TV. We would produce the most detailed reports on every aviation event that happened, even when somebody didn't die. And I think he felt that was missing, and that actually that could be a way of at least giving back to some families who may have lost somebody in tragic circumstances. At least they could understand that it hadn't been in vain, and that there was learning, and that actually perhaps others wouldn't suffer the same tragedy because of the investigation that took place.
Yeah, it's really interesting. One of the questions I asked you when we first spoke all those years ago at the King's Fund, I said to you, I didn't really share the belief in the similarity between the aircraft industry and the NHS, because in the aircraft industry, everybody has a shared desire to get home safely. So safety was important to the industry. It's important to the people running the industry, the airlines, the public, and to the people who fly the planes. They want to get home safely. Whereas in the NHS, if someone makes a mistake, they're still going to go home. It doesn't touch their lives in the personal way that it does in the airline industry. I just wonder if you remember what you said.
I was going to ask you, what did I say?
You disagreed with me. Yeah, you said you thought there were a lot of crossovers, but I wonder really now, with the benefit of hindsight, do you think that you might want to change the answer?
I think where people perhaps make the mistake with the comparison with aviation is trying to think of it operationally in the same sense. And I think it is a very different beast when it comes to that. I think where, if you like, the learning from aviation can really take place is the attitude and the approach to safety that aviation has taken, and maybe it had to because of all those things that you mentioned. But I do believe, and I don't think it has happened yet, that the same attitude would be hugely relevant and hugely revealing if the NHS across the board took that same approach, that there is something to be learned from every single thing that goes wrong. And I still don't think that is the case.
No, I don't. And I can't, I can't see really. I mean, the other day there was a thing in the press where somebody had left an item inside someone after an operation. And there are unbelievably strict guidance and mechanisms, as you know, you would have investigated these things yourself, where if you looked at the system, you would say it is impossible to leave anything inside a patient that shouldn't be in there. How the hell do you leave a pair of tweezers inside somebody? They're counted in, they're counted out. There's someone whose job it is to count them in and count them out. They're audited, they're checked. How the hell did that happen? And nothing happens. We don't know how it happened. They just got left in there. Well, if there were 10 to start with and there's only 9 when you finished, why can't we get to that sort of level of mature responsibility without someone thinking, oh God, I'm going to lose my job? That's really what it's about, isn't it?
Well, these things will always occur. And I know there's 2 schools of thought about whether you go for absolute zero or if you go for perhaps as low as reasonably practical.
Yeah.
And I'm more of a fan of the latter than the former, because again, the same thing happens in aviation. We cannot completely cut out mistakes. We cannot completely cut out technical failures, but you can try and reduce them. And the changes that have been made, if you like, with counting things in and leaving things inside people, it has got better over the years. There will still be errors, and these things will still happen. And there have been some amazing technical solutions that have been offered which all help reduce it, but to try and eliminate it altogether is probably impractical. And I think we just take the approach of trying to just reduce it every time. There's not going to be one huge fix, and it's going to take years and years and years. And this is sometimes the issue we have with the output from our investigations, is that people expect sometimes overnight success. We'll do an investigation into something, we'll make some recommendations, and then it will never happen again. And I just don't think that's realistic. But I think you have to continue all the time to be pushing and pushing and pushing to get better.
Yeah, they say, don't they, if you had £10 million to get to zero errors, you'd spend £1 million to get into the last error and spend 9 million getting rid of the last error. And that, I mean, I do absolutely agree, excuse me, with what you say about the impossibility of getting to zero. There's a very good book actually on the safety called Getting to Zero, which I can't remember now who wrote it, but it's worth a read. So you set the organization up. I think from the start, Keith, there was a tension or that you weren't actually independent. The air traffic people were independent. You weren't, but you were set up on the promise that come the changes to the Health and Social Care Bill, you would be independent. Is that right?
Yeah, more or less. I would say so. Yes. Yeah. I think for practical reasons, again, we had to be hosted by somebody to start with whilst we got ourselves up and running. I had my doubts at the time whether it should be NHS Improvement as it ended up being so, or whether it should be the Department of Health, which was the other option. And I'm not sure we went down the right direction. But yes, the idea was legislation will come along and put it onto a statutory footing and really make it properly independent as much as you possibly can as a taxpayer funded body.
Yeah. So what was the relationship like with NHSI?
It was, I think, ambivalent might be quite an interesting way to perhaps describe it to start with. And I think it's wobbled along that sort of line and got worse as time has gone on. I did, at the very start, before it had even really started going, I did have a chat with the Perm Sec at the department and said, probably we'd be better off in the department than in NHS England. He disagreed. He felt that if we were seen to be in the department, we'd be too close to Jeremy Hunt. And particularly at that time, that would have a negative effect. And perhaps he was right. Of course, all the transport branches are part of the Department for Transport, and it does work, even though you might say, well, actually, that's hardly independent. But sometimes the independence comes from your actions and the way you actually behave. And again, that takes time to see and embed that in the people, well, the people who work in the NHS. They have to see us live and breathe independence over years and years and years before they'll probably buy into it. I think the legislation that's gone through now will really accelerate that. And I'm pretty optimistic for the future body that it will be able to operate by and large independently.
It's still not really independent though, is it? But let's come on to that, because there's a lot of water went over the bridge between then and what's happening now. So when you set up, how did you intend to choose the issues that you wanted to investigate? Were they to be the result of a sort of some catastrophic event, or were you reading the data? Were you trying to spot problems? How did you, what was your sort of philosophy to set it up at the beginning?
Well, and that was one of the biggest problems to get it going, was what to investigate. We were given a remit of up to 30 a year when there are 20,000 STICE events or whatever it happens to be. How do you choose?
But even if, sorry to interrupt you, Keith, but I mean, even 30 a year is like nearly one a week, and that takes a lot of manpower.
It does take a lot of manpower, and we've never achieved 30 a year. We've kind of settled down to about 2 a month, which seems to be what our budget provides for in reasonable detail. And we decided we would look at things that were not unique to a particular place or trust, but were endemic throughout the system. So there were systemic problems that we could see multiple examples around the country, and we would try and get the learning. We maybe would use one as an example and then try and get the wider learning from that. And the big question that we asked ourselves, and we still ask ourselves, is what is it that we will bring to the party that hasn't been done previously? Because most of these things will have attracted the attention of somebody or an academic paper or something in the past. And we said, well, what can we bring that is different? And primarily what we brought is a different lens. We have people from other sectors, other industries looking at it, and especially the human factors approach. And I think the vast majority of the difference that we've done is that professional look at why people behaved the way they did to create these tragedies, these errors, if you like, that occurred. And I think in that respect, I think we've been pretty successful, and we have brought something quite different.
What are you, looking back on those early days, what are you most proud of?
I'm proud of the fact that we brought this professional approach to investigation, and I'm proud of the way we engaged with staff and families. And that's especially so, if you like, in our maternity program, which came on from that. But when we look at the feedback that we get from staff and families, and the staff in particular would be very nervous about us coming in. You know, there's an investigation going on, something bad's happened. We come in, we talk to the staff, and almost invariably afterwards they say, wow, that's a weight off my shoulders, almost a cathartic type experience, and have gone away understanding that when we say we don't apportion blame or liability, we actually really do mean that.
Yes. And that really, I mean, you touched on it just a moment or two ago in your answer, but that brings me to the sort of almost like the next phase in the development of the organization was when Jeremy Hunt decided to give you responsibility for maternity. I mean, a lot of us, you know, thought at the time that wasn't really the right thing to do. I mean, certainly you were there to investigate errors or potential errors in maternity, but to take on the sort of responsibility for the whole of it, it looked to me like you didn't really have the in-house expertise, and you certainly didn't have the budget.
Yeah, we were a little bit shocked that it happened so quickly when we really hadn't got going. We hadn't developed the method of doing, if you like, our normal national investigations. And suddenly we were being asked to do the maternity ones, which was going to quadruple the size of the organization. And the timetable was ridiculously short to be able to do this. And so it was. Was this discussed with you at all, or did somebody just ring up and say, "Hi, Keith, you're doing maternity, cheerio"? Probably in between the two. I mean, we kind of said, look, can we just have a little bit more time to get ourselves embedded in here? But there was a huge amount of pressure to do this. I think Jeremy always had his eye on the maternity landscape as one that he really wanted to concentrate on. And we were the obvious team. And I suppose if it didn't come to us, there was a danger it was going to go somewhere else. And so, yes, it was landed with us. And yeah, we had to do a lot of changes. And it was hugely distracting. At a really vulnerable time, as we'd only published, I think, a couple of national reports at the time. So it was difficult. And the maternity program, the scale of it was, we had about a year to set up, effectively move from 0 to 1,000 investigations a year. And again, I think it's an amazing success that we were able to do that. There was quite a bit of resistance from many of the maternity units in that first year, and continuing for a little while. But again, one of the great things is that's by and large turned around, and people, I think, now understand that having a national, a common type of investigation across it really does have its benefits. And we see quite a difference now in terms of the attitude towards us when we come in. People, I think, understand that we are actually coming in to help. We're not coming in again to apportion that global liability. Yeah. It's been hard won.
That's the bit I'm going to say. That's the big problem to overcome, isn't it? We're here from head office and we're here to help you. I mean, it's like
yes.
It's a joke, isn't it? Really, but it is. You know, it is a very difficult thing to do. And you know, when you look at recent events, Keith, the Ockenden review, and it looks like an Ockenden #2 is as well in Nottingham. I mean, what do you think about that? Because really, I mean, none of these reports have told us anything new about what can go wrong in maternity units, but none of them tell us really how we stop things going wrong in maternity units. They're always the same. They are always something to do with midwives under pressure, something to do with a difficult birth, something to do with oxygen starvation for the baby, and a disaster for the family. It just repeats itself time after time.
But I think that is why it is important that rather than trust doing their individual investigations, you do have a national body who has done now the best part of 3,000 of these investigations, coded, data's coming out, it is themed, and you know, there's the hints that actually there is a change in terms of the amount of serious brain injuries that happened. So it's early days, but that didn't happen before. And most of the Ockenden work, for instance, predates the involvement of HSIB maternity programme.
Yes, that's true, isn't it? It's easy to think that because Ockenden was done after, it's events that were done after it. You're right. It does predate. So what do you? I mean, now, I mean, Ockenden made a number of recommendations, which you know the government say they're going to adapt, and they could hardly adopt. They could hardly say anything other than that. Mm. But do you see an improvement? Do you see an improvement in the? I mean, what? Let me ask you another. Let me ask you another. Of all of the work that you've done in maternity services, what are the key factors that you think either need changed, sorted out, resourced, or whatever? I mean, are there a top number of key things that come out of the data?
The things that we see more generally are the sometimes the disconnect between, if you like, the midwives and then some of the call out of the obstetricians, the trigger for actually bringing the next layer of help in, working in a timely fashion to make sure that when something is going wrong, and it seems to go wrong very quickly sometimes, that actually that call goes out very quickly. The staffing, I think, is something that comes up in a lot of our reports as well, where they're not actually having their staff that are available or available on call. And just some of the equipment that's being used. Actually, we've done some themed reports on actually people understanding some of the equipment that they are using in, you know, some of the monitoring, the heart rate monitoring and all those sorts of things aren't often used to the best of their abilities. So number of technical and human sides of it. And the great thing is, because we're doing these time and time again in the trusts, we actually see the differences that then happen or sometimes don't happen as a result of it. So it does give us that sort of iteration within a trust. And by and large, the feedback is good. And actually, I think the important thing is that it continues because it's still a fledgling part of maternity safety. You know, we've only been doing it across all trusts for about 3 years. So it does take a long time. And I can't say that loud enough. People expect, and we have this from the politicians all the time, that instant set of results. It's just not going to happen. You have to do this. The air accident branch has been doing it for 100 odd years, and it needs that sort of consistency to actually produce the results that people want.
I think it's fascinating because, I mean, if you look at the common causality in maternity failings, it is the relationship between the midwives and the obstetricians, for example. I mean, that is that is not just isolated in one place, in one trust. It seems to be a much more general thing, that there is this reluctance to kind of work together as a team. Do you get any feel for why it's like that? Why is it?
You're probably asking the wrong person from my perspective. I mean, we see it happening time and time again. It seems to be almost embedded in a culture. Yeah. People, as they come into the organisation as juniors, they start to repeat what they see. I have to say, the same thing was in aviation 30, 40 years ago. when the junior pilots had come in, the captain was everything, and the challenge was very difficult for them. And it's taken years and years and years for that to be somewhat leveled up. So it's not going to be overnight. I think some of it is training, some of it is behaviour, and we need icons, if you like, in to try and break down that hierarchy.
Yeah.
Those are solutionising, and we must bear in mind as safety investigators, we try not to solutionize, we try and just give evidence as to what the problems are.
Yes, and certainly the most important step is the gathering of and the presentation of the evidence in an impartial way. Okay, so we've kind of got you up and running. You're doing God knows how much extra work on maternity. Then you ran into some difficulties internally, and we had ended up with the King's Fund being asked to carry out an investigation into the investigators. What was all that about?
So we had some staff who I think probably weren't well managed, didn't have their problems resolved. We had difficulties then with the relationship with HR from NHS England, our supporters. And so the staff went external, made a lot of noise, and to resolve that, it was decided that actually an external company should come in and have a look and see what's going on in here. And that's what the King's Fund did. And that's
who made the decision to bring in the King's Fund?
NHS England. And
it was their decision?
Yes.
And why was it the King's Fund? It seems an odd thing for them to do. It's not really their thing, is it?
I don't know. I don't know why the King's Fund came in. I guess they were seen as an independent, impartial body who could do that sort of report.
Yeah, you said that you've got staff that are making a lot of noise. I mean, do you think it was noise, or in retrospect, do you think they had a case?
Oh,
was there a case to answer?
Yeah, no, I'm sure they did have a case to answer, and again, I don't think they were probably well managed, so we were absolutely at fault there, and didn't resolve those problems at the time.
Do you think that was because the organisation expanded quickly to take on the maternity function, and perhaps your line management or your interim management wasn't well trained, wasn't supported? I mean, why do you think this happened?
I do think that the rate at which we grew was so quick during a sort of a 2-year sort of period that probably our recruitment wasn't as good as it could be. Our training of the people as they came in probably wasn't as good as it could be, for various different reasons. And I'm holding my hand up and say actually it wasn't good enough. But then the legacy was that actually once we were up and running, people were in there who didn't necessarily have the skill set to be able to manage that. And then things didn't get resolved and people got frustrated. And I think that was probably the end result. So, yeah. Probably
do you accept any personal responsibility for that?
Oh, of course, yeah. I mean, I was the head of the organisation, and so actually the line management, should have been sorted out, should have been better trained. It wasn't. I think the King's Fund was, or whatever, that sort of cultural report probably was necessary. It came up with some good recommendations, and in fact, many of the recommendations that it made were already in train. But it gave us that sort of extra kick to get on with them. And I'm sure that they will be worked on over the next 6 months as well.
What do you make of the fact that a large chunk of the King's Fund report was redacted, and it took a real struggle under the FOI, I think, to get it into the public domain?
Well, I mean, it was commissioned by NHS England. I guess it was up to them what they did with the report. We really didn't have much say in what the publication or not was. It wasn't our report. We just paid for the thing. But
it just seems curious that even the authors of the report had their names redacted from the report.
I have to say I wasn't even aware of that. Yeah. I don't know. I don't know the reason why that should be. Yes.
Did you see the full report?
Yeah, I've seen the report. Yes.
Yeah. What did you think when you read it?
I thought their recommendations that they came up with were probably the right ones. I thought it was probably not as well balanced as it could have been or weighted. And I think it was a little bit subjective at times. But I suppose I'm used to writing reports. I'm used to what a impartial investigation report looks like, and I think there are areas where probably it was more subjective than it needed to be.
Yeah, people who've read it said to me that they thought it was more subjective than it needed to be. And a number of recommendations recommended the King's Fund come in and do some extra work. It looked like an advert for the King's Fund, I think. I'm not sure. I don't know.
Yeah.
I haven't read it. I don't know. But it must have caused you a load of grief within the organisation.
Yes, it was a pretty difficult time. It probably did give us the kick that perhaps we needed. But I think we were on the road to resolving many of those issues as it was. But
Yeah.
That's the way it goes.
So what would you put it down to? Like an expansion created a vacuum, and the vacuum wasn't filled with enough experienced management, I suppose.
I certainly think we recruited too rapidly. We probably, if I was to do it again, I would just put the brakes on. I would insist that we have more time to actually set ourselves up in a little bit more structured way.
Yeah.
And make sure people will try.
That decision for Jeremy Hunt to get you to take on the whole responsibility of maternity looks to me, as just an observer of the scene, that looks to me like a bit of a fulcrum point, really, where it created you a lot of difficulties. You weren't in a position. I guess if you were independent, you could have said to him, Jeremy, I'll do this in 6 months. But because you're not independent, you couldn't really do that, could you?
Do you know, we could probably have said more strongly, absolutely, we don't want to take this on right now. When I think back at it, with that extra growth comes a little bit more weight. We were certainly concerned when we were initially established how small we were.
Yeah.
Actually, were we really going to be able to make an impression at that sort of size? And so, to an extent, having more people, more influence could actually have, there could be some benefits to that. And I think that actually has come true to a certain extent. I think most people have probably heard of HSIB through the maternity program rather than the national side of things. So we do have to weigh that up. But I think the time that we had to actually establish it was what was wrong.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's move on from that then. So you've got your internal problems, you're trying to sort them out. Where did excuse me, forgive me coughing. Where did the organization go then after that? What were you trying to do? You kind of got the maternity thing up and running. You've had the King's Fund aggravation. What as a manager, what were you trying to do then at that point?
Well, I mean, really, we've come right up to date here, and I suppose what we're trying to do now is to refine the amount, the investigations that we do, and by that I mean taking in referrals. We want more referrals coming into the organisation, and we're looking at the way we decide what to investigate and trying to get better and better at doing that. I believe that we have the methodology, the way we do our investigations, I think is good. I think that's matured very nicely now. And it's really taking on investigations where we can produce something really meaningful at the other end. And alongside that, what we've introduced, and I think this is working very well, is that training for NHS investigators within their own trusts and organisations. And over the last year, we've rolled out multiple courses, all virtually, of course, at the moment. And we've trained hundreds and hundreds of NHS staff in how to do investigations in the way that we do them, obviously without the same resource. And so that, perhaps more than anything else, might make the difference at scale that will actually make a big change to the NHS.
Do you think that in an organisation, in the trust, they'll do that? The independent bit of it is the quite important part of the bureau, isn't it?
It is important, but again, we have to be realistic. And most of the investigations are going to be done by people who work in the trust. And I think they can do that, even where they work in the same place. We offer, at the same time as teaching the trust investigators how to do it. We have a course for senior decision makers, if you like, board level, on what a professional safety investigation means. And that's been pretty popular as well. It's only a couple of hours, but it's to try and get this message over about actually just taking somebody out and saying, you're the problem, moving you on is actually not really going to answer or solve anything. And those courses combined, I think will produce, and it's yet to be seen, but I think they will make some significant changes to the way safety investigation is done at scale.
Yeah. I tell you what impressed me, the number of trusts who do the case review after each death in a trust. And that was something that was trialled by the Department of Health. They funded it, and then the funding went, and some trusts carried on doing it. And that seemed to me something that we really ought to try and do as routine.
Absolutely. I mean, any way in which we can squeeze more learning out of something terrible that has happened has got to be good for the future. And we're just trying to play our part in that. And it's like our part in safety in general. You know, we are but a cog in that whole system. And I'll probably come on to safety management systems and the way the NHS approaches safety in general, where I think there is a huge amount more scope to move further. But we play our role, and others in the NHS have to play their role as well.
When we talk about safety, I mean, the pinch point, Keith, you must know this, I think, in the NHS is the fact that if someone makes a mistake, they get the whole panoply of regulation, licensing, NMC, GMC. I mean, we just throw everything at them, don't we? And there must be at that moment when they make a mistake, they think, shall I cover this up and try and get away with it, or am I going to have to face all the bloody aggravation I'm going to get because I've made a mistake?
Well, that may be the case, but I do think even with our limited number of investigations, we are doing something to change that culture. And by us doing investigations, by training trusts in the way of doing these, where actually you don't focus on the person, but you focus on everything around it, the system, the environment, the tools, all those sorts of things, I think bit by bit we will make a difference. And I think the legislation that's coming in will really add to that in protecting the information that is given to us and helping people understand that actually just because something bad has happened, they don't need to cover it up, and that actually some good can come of it. So I'm much more optimistic than you are in that respect.
Well, let's hope you're right. And of course, you bring us, as you say, up to date now with the current legislation. Okay, we've got what we've got. Let's talk me through that, because some people feel, don't they, that because they would argue you are not truly independent, therefore you can't treat issues confidentially with any sort of meaningful confidentiality, and I think it's probably fair to say there's a suspicion around what is likely to happen next. What's your view of all that?
Well, two things really. At the moment, we have no powers. You know, there's nothing we can do to protect anything that's given to us. We are at the whim of any sort of court order or anything else to release information. And yet, actually, a vast majority of people still are happy to tell us, open up and tell us everything that they know about an incident. I think as we move into a place where actually by law, information that we hold will be protected, will encourage even those more cynical about the whole thing to start telling us everything as well. That's definitely what's happened in the transport world over the years. And we talked to a lot of the medical unions, and they are very encouraged by this legislation. They will be encouraging their members to say, look, it's okay to speak up to these guys. They cannot release it by law. It would take the High Court to overturn that. So actually take confidence that this is a place where you can bring all that great evidence to the party and changes can occur. So I think it will work. I think it will work really well. I mean, there's a lot of work to do to get it to that stage, but yeah, I think that the legislation, by and large, is absolutely fantastic, and it's, to me, one of the highlights of my time in the NHS.
Under what circumstances do you see that being tested, Keith? I mean, you could imagine a set of circumstances where a family are beside themselves because of the death of a relative or something that may or may not have happened as a result of an accident that you are aware of or you are investigating. So let's be clear. So by law, you wouldn't be subject to disclosure in the normal way in a court case.
Correct. We would not be allowed to disclose. And so the only recourse the family would have if they wanted some information would be to go to the High Court and appeal to the High Court, who could overturn and authorise disclosure.
But that will be on a case-by-case basis, I suppose.
That would be on a case-by-case basis, but
because there's no precedent, it would you'd have to set new law, I suppose, case law.
Yeah, no doubt it will be tested. So there's two things on this. First, in the current situation where, for instance, a coroner can demand a statement that's been given to us by a witness, a clinician, it's only happened on one particular case out of the 50-odd national investigations that we have done. Secondly, when I look back, again, the transport world has this protection of this information that's given to it. And in my time in the air accident world, I went to court, I think, twice, and both because to the High Court, where there was an appeal made by the police, in fact, in those cases. And in neither of those occasions did the High Court overturn and authorise disclosure. So I think the confidence will be there that it will be protected. And on the other side of things, the families will still get the information in an unaccredited way through the reports anyway. I mean, that's the whole point. People give us this sort of information. It's not as if we go, thanks very much, we're never going to use it. We use it, we triangulate it to actually form the final report that goes with that particular investigation. So all the details will come out, they just won't be attributed to a particular individual.
It's interesting, isn't it? Well, look, I've got an eye on the time. I want to leave time for people to ask any questions. If you've got a question, then please just drop it in the chat or put your hand up or whatever it is you do on Zoom and let us know, and John will invigilate that for us. So please don't go away thinking, God, I wish I'd asked that question, because it's the last time you're going to have to ask this man a question, because he's off now. He's going to run Ironman around the world or whatever it is he's going to do, what he's going to do next. So Keith, looking back on your time, give us a flavor. Give us some things that you've investigated where, as a result, you've made a difference.
So, I mean, right from the really early investigations, we investigated a toddler who swallowed a battery, and nobody understood that she had swallowed this battery, and she died from it.
You know, there was one in the press just last week, and the numbers on it, horrendous. Something like 8,000 kids a year swallow these things. Yep.
And so we've had safety recommendations out there where they're actually looking at changing the whole design of some of these batteries to try and make it more difficult for this to happen. So, you know, I think that was very important. We did an investigation into nasogastric tubes where they used the wrong type of pH paper, because there were two types.
That's when the tube goes down, it goes into the lung and not down the right hole.
Yeah. And the trust had two different types of pH paper with different scales on, and strange enough, they got them mixed up and they thought one was a different pH to what it was, and so that led to food being poured into the lung. So there was a change to the pH paper procurement after that.
But that's, I mean, if you just stay, I want you to do another one in a minute, but I mean, just looking at that one, that's so similar, isn't it, to the airlines, you know, because I'm an absolute fan of this air crash investigation thing on Sky. I watch it like back to back, but I mean, there was one where on a flight deck, they moved a switch You know, I don't know what the switch was. I can't remember now, but you've been on a flight deck, you know, there's like a blitz of switches and stuff, isn't there? And this one particular switch was responsible for something horrible happening, and they ended up moving the switch and stopped it happening. And here you are in the NHS, you end up changing the measurement. Right. It's a bit like the switch on the flight deck, isn't it? It is those little things which are the huge big things, and I always say the closer you get to a little thing, the bigger it gets. And that's, I just think that the comparison between those two things is really interesting.
It is, but in a way that I found less of those things in the NHS because we're trying to look at sort of system failures more than those individual ones, so we don't see so many of those. Another one that we looked at was the never event list, and we recommended changes to that list because the events that we looked at didn't have these strong, robust barriers in place, which are supposed to be there as part of being on the list. So the list has been changed as a result of that, which has had knock-on effects as well.
I've got another one for you. Dosset boxes. You know, those boxes that old people get from the chemist where they put their 3 or 4 pills for the day and they come all ready to use. Well, Boots are going to stop doing it for some reason or other. And if they stop doing it, the other pharmacies will stop doing it as well. And I tell you, that will cause all kinds of aggravation with people with multiple conditions and you're taking God knows how many pills a day. Don't let them take the Dosset boxes, Keith.
Put in a referral. We can investigate it. Yes.
That's it. I will. I'm going to get it in before you leave. Right. So, look out for my letter. Okay, go on. Sorry, I cut you off in your prime. Give us another couple.
We did one where a woman eventually became blind because she had glaucoma, and they failed to follow up the initial interview and assessment. And when we looked at this, we looked at the tariffs for the follow-up were much less than the original ones, and so we've got to change there to the tariffs so that they've balanced up now, which is a major breakthrough in terms of, again, it's behavior. It's just the way people behave. I don't mean to cause problems, but these things just lead people down a particular track. So I thought that was a really positive move.
Yeah.
So
yeah, terrific. Okay, so what about the future, Keith? I mean, you know, you'll be gone by next Tuesday, I think, and don't have a birthday party unless you want another investigation. But don't invite me. What do you see for the future?
Well, I see it's going to be a different organisation, because now, as you're probably aware, the maternity is going to be separating into its own special health authority. So we're back.
Yes, actually, I meant to just this briefly follow that. I mean, that looks to me to be the right move. Do you think it's the right move?
I'm very comfortable with it. I think there was probably more that we could have done, more agility from keeping the organisation of the same size, but having more flexibility to choose what we investigated. But the way the legislation has worked out, it would be very difficult to do that. So actually having those two, I think, is probably the most practical output. And I'm delighted. I think it was so important that the maternity was able to carry on for another 5 years. It feels like the work's just starting. So it will be different.
Dame Julia Cumberledge, Baroness Cumberledge, will be pleased.
Yes, yeah. Well, I think everybody should be pleased. I think it's great news. I really hope that the new organisation is able to work better with NHS England. And if there's one thing that has frustrated me, it has been the response of NHS England to kind of hosting us, looking after us, supporting what is a world first. You know, we were the first state-sponsored safety investigation body in the world. And it didn't feel like the NHS England really bought into that. And I hope as the separation occurs with this arm's length body, HSIB, that actually it will be able to have a better relationship.
I think you know, you've caught them at a really bad time. I mean, Simon's gone. Amanda has taken over. They've got 4 or 5 new non-executives coming in. They've got a new chairman. he's up to his neck in waiting lists and aggravation on the front page of the Daily Mail. I mean, it's going to be hard, I think, to leverage up the list of priorities of stuff they've got to do, because they have such a huge list of stuff they've got to do.
And one of the dangers, and it's the same with the pandemic, is that when these crises occur, you stop thinking about safety. And that is just 180 out from where it should be, because there's so much that you can learn. You know, we did this nosocomial investigation during the pandemic, and we produced not many recommendations, but a whole raft of information on how hospitals could help themselves in infection prevention. And it was probably one of the most important investigations we did. And yet trying to get the information out of those who held it, primarily in NHS England, was a nightmare. You know, and they're saying, oh, we're far too busy doing all this other sort of stuff. But actually, if you step back and look at the bigger picture, actually, you can really make the whole thing more efficient. So I think it's a big mistake if you push safety down the priority list. And unfortunately, that's the way the NHS tends to operate.
Oh, it is, and you can understand it, because you know it's run by politicians, and the politicians' agenda is set by what's on the front page of the Daily Mail. You can see what's going to happen. Let me get just very quickly, Helen Hughes. Good evening, Helen. Hello, give us a wave. He says, a familiar question that we've discussed many times. No one seems to be taking oversight of whether trusts and others are implementing the recommendations that you've made and have been accepted. Something we highlighted in the Mind the Implementation Gap report. What do you think is needed to address the safety system gap?
So two things. I think the new body should take responsibility, and I have lobbied for this. So by the new body, I mean the HSIB, should take responsibility for following up on the actions that have been promised by the safety recommendation response. So often people come back to us and say, yeah, we accept it. We're going to do A, B, C, and D in 2023. Somebody needs to go and check that they have done that. And I think that fits nicely with the new body. But I also think it needs the work of, and it looks like the National Patient Safety Committee, to actually look at it and go, actually, they've done those things, or they haven't done those things. Has it made any difference whatsoever? And that loop needs to be actually sorted, because that just doesn't happen right now.
Yeah. Just quickly, Annabelle Collins, she wants to refer back to the whistleblowing time. He said that the cultural problems were first raised by HSIB staff in 2019, both as whistleblowers and staff survey. Why were these problems not addressed in the 2 years between that and the King's Fund independent review? Do you want to deal with that?
I think it was trying to understand some what the problems were, and I think actually we were probably too slow in putting in the recommendations that were needed at the time. I think we were just flat out trying to get the maternity program was just fully live by then, and I think we were distracted by that, and we didn't pay enough attention to some of those internal problems. Yeah.
I must say, as an independent observer, it seemed very clear to me, and I said so at the time, that this was a very embryo organisation that's suddenly been dumped with this hugely important and full of public interest issue, dumped and told to get on with it. And I think that was probably a bad move. So we got a couple of minutes left. Keith, what are you optimistic for the future for the organisation? Is it on a good enough footing? Is the legislation going to be right? How's your successor going to manage? What are you going to say? Have you left 3 envelopes in the drawer?
Yeah, none of them have got any money in them. I'm a born optimist. You know, I think the legislation is good. I think we have a great opportunity for the future. I don't know, a lot of it will depend on who's chosen for the chair and the no execs and the new chief exec for the future. Because with that legislation in place, I think they can achieve great things. I think the Special Health Authority can go on and really start to hone in on a lot of the maternity stuff that we already know. I think there's going to be some interesting battles with the department and NHS England from the more independent body that's going to follow. But I think it absolutely should be able to do those. And have
you spoken to Richard Meddings, the new chair of NHS England?
No. No, I don't think I've really spoken to any of the hierarchy in NHS England.
That kind of says something, doesn't it?
Well, when you compare it to, for instance, I meet 6 monthly with the head of the CQC and many of the other NICE, all the Royal Colleges, but NHS England, no, I think the priorities are probably elsewhere.
Well, in one way I can understand it, and another way, really, I can't. So what are you going to do now then? You're going to run off into the clear blue yonder of vision in Lycra or on your bike, or what are you going to do?
I'm going to take a few months for myself, yeah, get myself sorted, and I'll see. You know, when I get to your ripe old years, Roy, I expect that I will have probably come back and done a couple of bits and bobs in the NHS. I do have quite a lot of knowledge. And I think, as I was saying to you before we started, it's fascinating that this is your organisation, are the only people who've actually almost debriefed all the knowledge that actually I have gained in my viewpoint over these years. And I think that says so much by itself. The fact nobody else has actually asked for my opinion on what's what, and what do I think coming from a completely different sector. So I'll take some time off, and then perhaps I'll come back and be speaking to you again in a few years' time.
Well, I very much hope so. I mean, I think it'd be a tragedy if I mean, look, you've come from another industry, you've had a look at us, you've been beaten up by us, you've sorted some stuff out for us. I mean, you have a huge hinterland, and just to let that go, I think would be bloody crazy myself. So I very much hope to see you back in some form or other. And anyway, listen, it's been a great pleasure to talk to you again. I enjoyed it the first time. I don't know why we didn't do one in the middle, but we didn't know when the middle was, did we? Otherwise, so
maybe this is the middle. Yeah, maybe there's more to come. Yes,
this is the one in the middle. Yes, but thank you so much, and for being very frank with us as well. I think that says a great deal to credit you. So, listen, thank you for the job you've done. Thank you for helping to make the NHS safer. And we wish you a brief, happy retirement, and we look forward to welcoming you back to another Health Chat. So we've just got a few minutes for me now to hand back to John and for me to say good night to everybody.
Thank you, Roy. Thank you, Keith, and thank you to all of you for tuning in this evening. That's the close of the Health Chat.